Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Now in the previous video, we created some of the components that are specific to the home screen. We defined the color scheme of our application and we created some of the components that you're going to be reusing throughout our application. Now in this video, we are going to be creating the remainder of components that are specific to the home screen, and then you're going to move on to the next screen. Now the next screen, which we're going to be calling create task screen, is going to hold all the components that are going to get task data from the user. We are then going to be validating this data before we save it to the database. Now, in relation to the create task screen, we're just going to be creating the blueprint for the task screen so that in the next video, we are going to be adding those specific components that are going to allow us to get task data from a user interacting with our application. Now, if you like this kind of content, consider subscribing to my channel. Turn your notifications on so that you'll be notified when I upload a new video. And with that said, let's get started. Before we continue from where we left, we're going to make a few changes to our existing code. That is, you're going to remove this line of code, line 3, include kv files components.kv, because we've already added the components.kv in the main.py file. By removing this line, we are avoiding any repetition because, as you can see, we are getting a warning saying that kvfiles.component has already been included. And by removing this line of code, we are no longer going to get this error. Now for the home screen, we have 3 widgets remaining. That is, we need the rocket image at the far right. We also need the progress bar that is going to hold the percentage of all the tasks completed irrespective of task category. And finally, we need a label that is going to hold the information of the task completed within a specific category. So let's start with the image. To do that, we're going to be adding the image inside this relative layout. So to add an image, use the image widget and set the source attribute to the directory where the image is. Now for us, you'll notice that apart from all the subdirectories that we initially had, we have a new subdirectory called assets. And in this assets subdirectory, we have the rocket.png. It's also in this assets subdirectory that you're going to be adding other image files, including the image icon and the splash screen for our application. So I'll set the source to assets, the folder, and specifically to rocket.png. But at the moment, you'll notice that the rocket is quite big, so we need to make it a little bit smaller. To do that, I'm going to set the size hint x of the relative layout to 0.3. Basically, what this line means is that the MD relative layout is going to occupy 30% of the entire width, and then the remaining 70% is going to be occupied by this top MD relative layout. And with that, we are done with the image. Next, we're going to add the layout that is going to hold the instructions for our progress bar. To do that, we're going to make a few changes to the layout of our existing card. That is, I'm going to nest these 2 relative layouts inside and box layout. So I'll set that to MD box layout. And the reason why I'm nesting the 2 relative layouts inside the box layout is so that we can add another relative layout that is going to hold the instructions for our canvas. But because we want this relative layout to be stacked below the box layout, we have to first nest the entirety of this block inside the box layout so that these 2 relative layouts are going to be stacked horizontally, and then this relative layout and the box layout are going to be stacked vertically. And to have these 2 layouts stacked vertically, we're going to set the orientation to vertical. And just like that, we have the relative layout stacked below this box layout. Now it's in this relative layout that we're going to have our canvas instruction, but at the moment it's quite big and we have to fix that. Also, remember in the previous video, we said that if at all you're going to be working with canvas instructions, you need to set the size of the containing widget to absolute. So to do that, we are going to set both the size hint x and size hint y to none of the relative layout, okay? Because at the moment you can see it's occupying a large space, and we can just give it a MDBG color so that you can see the bounds of this specific relative layout. I'm going to give it BG2 just so that we can see the bounds of this relative layout. And as you can see, it's occupying quite a large space, and we need it to occupy just a small space enough for the canvas instruction. So to do that, I'm going to set the size, which is a tuple, takes the width and the height. Now for the width, I'm going to set it to window.width. And then I'm going to set the height to dp20, just a small height that is going to hold the information for the canvas. But you can see that although we have that size set, you'll notice that the width of this relative layout bleeds past the card. So to fix that, we're going to subtract a small value from this. Let me subtract 30 so that we have this relative layout within the bounds of the card. That is it. And then next, we're going to add the canvas instructions. And to do that, we're going to be adding the canvas instructions inside the templates.py. That means that we need to be able to access this relative layout from the templates.py. To access this relative layout from the templates.py file, we're going to give it an ID. I'm going to give it an ID of progress. And then inside the templates.py, and inside this home screen, I'm going to define a new instance attribute. I'll call it self.progress. And this self.progress is also an instance of the MD widget. It's going to hold the specific relative layout whose ID we've set to progress. And just like that, we are now able to access this relative layout from the .py file. I'm also going to get rid of this MDBG color because we just used it for demonstration and just so that we can see the bounds of this relative layout. And then we're going to be using the with context manager so that inside this context manager, we can create the canvas instructions for our progress bar. So we'll say with self.progress.canvas. We're going to be using the canvas attribute. And then in here, I'm going to define a color class. I'm going to change the entire color of the Kiwi canvas and set that to BG colors. We're going to be using BG2 for this. And then next, we're going to create an instance of the line class. But instead of using circles like we did in the task card, we are going to be using points. Okay, so basically points, the points argument takes two pairs of coordinates, that is the x and y, x and y. And we only need two pairs of coordinates, the start of our progress bar and the end of our progress bar. So for the start of our progress bar, because we have set the width of this specific relative layout to absolute, we are going to be using the self.progress.x, okay? And for the y, we are going to set it to self.progress.center.y, so that we can have this line suspended at the center within the y-axis. And then for the next pair of coordinates, we're going to set that to the entire window width. So we'll say window.width, but you're going to also subtract dp30 like we did in the relative layout. And then we're going to set its height to self.progress.center.y. Okay, and with that, we should have a line drawn from the start all the way to window.width minus dp30. And then I'm going to give it a width of dp4 to make it a little bit pronounced. Okay, and there we have it. And then we're going to create another color instance, and I'm going to set this RGB to BG colors, and then we're going to be using our primary background color, that is BG1. And then after that, I'm going to copy this line of code. Basically, to be able to create the progress bar, we're going to encase one line instruction inside of another line instruction. But for the second one, we're going to be manipulating the x coordinate of the second pair of coordinates, right? So in this case, we're going to be manipulating this. Okay, now so that we can actually see the progress, I'm going to reduce the width of this to 3. Yeah, and you'll notice that we have one line encased within another line. And like I said, we're going to be manipulating the x coordinates of the second pair of coordinates. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to replace this. So this is just for demonstration with random.random range, just like we did with the circular progress. And then we're going to start at self.progress.x, and we are going to end at window.width minus dp30. Okay, that means each time we save the file, you'll notice that the width of the inner line changes. That is basically what we want. I'll also add a value to the start x coordinate so that we can push the progress bar in a little. So I'll add dp5 for this and do the same for this. So I'll say plus dp5. Okay, like that. Looks nice. We're also going to do the same for the first line. So dp5, just so that we can have a uniform padding for all the elements within the card. So the final component that you're going to be adding inside the home screen is going to be a label. So the label is going to be at the top left of every card that we have inside the grid layout. So to do that, you're going to switch to the components.kv file. And you can remember that each card in here is represented by the TaskCard class. So and then inside this relative layout, which is the first section of the entire card, is where we want to have our label. So to do that, I will define a label class, and then I'll set its text attribute to percent. This again is just but a placeholder, and then I'm going to give it a text color of text colors. We're going to be using txt2 for this. And just like that, we are done with all the components that we require for the home screen. Now we're going to move on to the next screen. Like I said in the introduction, we are going to call it the create task screen. The create task screen is going to hold all the components we require to be able to get information that we're going to save later on after validation. So I'll switch back to the templates.py, and to do that, I'm going to create a new class. I'll call it create task, and this create task class is going to inherit from the MD screen because it's also a screen. Okay, and then we need to define the same class inside the kv-lang file, and because the create task is also a root widget or a parent widget, I'm going to use the syntax create task inside angle brackets like we did with the home screen. And instead of having the home screen as the only widget inside the manager, we're going to create a new instance variable, call it self.create screen, which is going to hold an instance of the create task. And then apart from that, we're going to give it a name of create task. And with this line of code, we have created an instance of the create task screen. And then because we're going to be working exclusively from the create task screen, we're going to replace the home screen as the only widget inside the manager with self.create screen as the only widget. Okay. Now, before we create the layout for the create task screen, let us look at its blueprint. So for the create task screen, this is the blueprint. We have one grid layout as the main layout, and then inside that grid layout, we're going to nest two layouts. That is an MD box layout and an MD scroll view, okay? Inside this box layout is where we're going to have an IBTN instance. Now you can either use an MD box layout or an MD relative layout. It is inconsequential because we are only nesting one widget inside this specific layout, okay? And this instance of the IBTN class is going to allow the user to transition from the create task screen to the home screen, okay? And then apart from the box layout, we are going to have an MD card nested inside the scroll view. Inside this MD card, we're going to have three specific cards, specific custom cards. Each card is going to hold a specific task data category. Now for the first card, it's going to hold data related to task identity, that is the task title and the task description. The second card is going to hold task data related to time, that is the start time, the start date, and the end date. And then the final MD card is going to hold task data specific to category. That is, you're going to have an MD dropdown that is going to allow a user to select from the list of categories that a user can assign to a specific task, okay? And then finally, we are going to have a BTN. It is when this BTN is clicked that you're going to perform validations of all the tasks that have been added, okay? And once the validation checks, we're going to save this data to the database. So let's create the layout for the create task screen. To do that, we're going to switch to the kv-lang file, and in here we're going to create the first layout, that is the MD grid layout. We are going to set its call property to 1, and then inside this grid layout we're going to have two layouts. We're going to have an MD box layout and we're going to have an MD scroll view. Basically, we are going to work our way in. We have a typo, it's MD grid layout, not MG grid layout, so it's MD grid layout. Sorry for that. And then now that we have the two layouts, we are going to start with the box layout. Like we said, that box layout is going to hold an IBTN, and we are going to give it an icon of chevron left. When clicked, it's going to allow the user to go back to the home screen, and you can see we have that button. At the moment, the box layout and the scroll view occupy a size hint y of 0.5.5, basically 50-50. But that is not what we want. We want to reduce the size of the box layout just so that it can be able to hold the IBTN. So to fix that, we'll set its size hint y to none, okay? And then I'm going to give it a small height of DP50, just a small height. And then for the IBTN, I'm going to give it an MD BG color of BG colors. We're going to be using BG1, our primary background color, okay? And then for the icon, we're also going to change that. But before we change that, in the first BTN we used inside the home screen, you'll notice that we set the theme text color to custom. We need to get rid of this line of code inside the kv-lang file and save it in the components .kv file, because for every instance of IBTN that you're going to be creating, we don't want to repeat this line of code, because for all IBTNs that you're going to be using, we are going to be changing their icon colors. Switching back to the kvlang file, I'm going to change the icon color for this IBTN to text colors. We're going to be using TXT3 for this, okay, like that. And then remember that in the home screen, we had set the padding for the parent grid layout to 7. We're also going to do that for the second grid layout. We're going to set its padding to 7. And then moving to the MD scroll view, we're going to be nesting an MD list. And then inside this MD list, we are going to be having 3 cards. Now, these cards are going to be different from all the cards that we have used, because we are going to be manually setting their heights. Now we're going to be manually setting their heights to ensure that the heights of this card are just enough to nest their respective widgets. So to do that, we're going to switch back to the components.kv, and you're going to create a new component. I'm going to call it tcard, okay? And this tcard is going to inherit from the card class. And we know that the card class, apart from all the attributes that a card has from the MD card, it also has its MD color set to BG1. And then apart from that, we're going to give it a size hint Y of none so that we can manually set the height. And then we're going to give it a small padding of DP5. This padding is just specific to all the contents that are going to be nested inside the T card. Switching back to the kvlang file, we're going to add 3 T cards to represent the 3 task data categories that we expect. We're going to have 3. Now that we have nested 3 cards, I'm going to give them a small spacing of DP5 between the cards, but you'll notice that we are able to scroll through the cards despite the fact that we haven't set the size hint Y of the scroll view to none before setting its height manually, and that works because we have nested an MD list inside the MD scroll view. Next, we are going to create another MD relative layout. Now I'm using a relative layout because inside this relative layout I want to nest an MD fill round flat icon button that when clicked is going to perform validation on all the task information that we have received from the user before saving it to the database. So to do that, I'm also going to give it a small height. So I'll first set its size hint Y to none, okay, and then I'll give it a small height of DP50, just like we did with the box layout. And then inside here we need to nest an MD fill round flat icon button, but we don't have that MD fill round flat icon button. So to add that, we're going to switch to the components.kv file. I'm going to create a new component. I'm going to call it ITBTN. So the ITBTN basically stands from icon text BTN. It's going to inherit from the MD fill round flat icon button, okay? And then we're going to give it some default properties. We are going to set the theme text color to custom and theme icon color, we're also going to set that to custom, okay? For this, we need, for the IBTN, that is the icon BTN, we need to set this to theme icon color, not theme text color. Now that we have the ITBTN created, we are going to switch back to the kvlang file, and then we're going to nest it inside the MD relative layout. So I'll say ITBTN. For the icon, we are going to be using timer plus outline, and then for the text, I'm going to set that to save task. And then for the background color, I'm going to set that to MDBG color. We're going to be using our primary background color, so BG1, and there we have it. And then next, I'm going to manually set the heights of each T card. So for this first T card, I'm going to set its height to DP200. For the second, I'm going to set its height to DP400. And for the last card, I'm going to set its height to DP100. Okay. Finally, I'm going to push this IBTN to the right. So I'll set its position hint, the right position hint to 1, so that we can have the ITBTN pushed to the right. And there we have it, guys. So we have created the blueprint for the create task screen. Now in the next video, we're going to be adding the various components that are going to allow us to capture task information from the user before we can validate them and save them to the database. Now, if you have any questions or thoughts, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next. Bye.